turns out I actually am gonna record a YouTube video because I recorded 9 minutes of stuff on TikTok and then it deleted it before I got the chance to post it. That was really annoying. Anyway, I'm gonna need to actually edit this because I'm yapping about nothing. Anyway, what I'm meaning to talk about is the provisional IRA and masculinity. Now where's my essay? I already talked about this for 9 minutes, and now I'm gonna start at the beginning. You're welcome. Okay, so the title of my essay is Provos as Protectors, Nationalism, Masculinity, and the Provisional Irish Republican Army. So I'll just read my abstract to you so that you understand what's happening. Nationalism has typically sprung from masculinized memory, masculinized humiliation, and masculinized hope. That's a quote from Cynthia Enlow. This paper argues that the Provisional Irish Republican Army saw themselves as the masculine defenders of the Irish nation. The Provisional IRA viewed themselves as a continuation of the Irish Republican Army from the Irish War of Independence 1919 to 1921, inheriting the views of the IRA on the relationship between masculinity and decolonization. Men in the Provisional IRA felt emasculated by their British colonizers. This is shown in the Green Book as well as in testimony from members of the Provisional IRA. The Green Book was the Provisional IRA's handbook outlining their justification for engaging in terrorism in the pursuit of a united Ireland. It also includes descriptions of what members of the Provisional IRA should expect and how they should behave when they are interrogated. The Green Book is of unclear authorship as it is a handbook for a paramilitary organization. The comments from my professor said, this wording is a bit heavy-handed. And he said, is this how they defined it? The term is often contested about terrorism. But that is what I said. So the Troubles, 1969 to 1998, was a civil war in Northern Ireland involving Irish Republicans, Loyalist Unionists, and the British Army. I'm actually not going to read you this entire essay. If you really, 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 really want me to read you the entire essay, I could do that, but I'm not going to do that in this video. So then I have my introduction where I lay out the groups involved in the Troubles. So the Provisional IRA, the Ulster Defence Association, the Ulster Volunteer Force, the British Army, UDA and UVF were Unionists, Republicans wanted a united and sovereign Ireland, Unionists wanted Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom. This paper discusses theories of nationalism and masculinity, then the interplay between masculinity and nationalism as it relates to the 1916 Rising and the War of Independence. Next, information surrounding the Provisional IRA, such as methods, history, and emergence. More about the Green Book. Interrogation. The basis for the Provisional IRA viewing themselves as the masculine defenders of the Irish nation traces back to the 1916 Easter Rising. The Easter Rising was an armed rebellion against British rule in Ireland. Although the British Army put down the Easter Rising, it led to the re-emergence of Irish nationalism in the public consciousness of Ireland. The Provisional IRA retained the original Irish Republican Army's views regarding the manly honor that calls men to defend their country, because they viewed themselves as the inheritors of the struggle of Irish Republicans from the War of Independence. And then I talk about other literature in the field, so that's Fidelma Ashe and Begonia Erzkaz. I don't know how to pronounce her name. But both of those academics explored the ethno-nationalist conflict in Northern Ireland. And I'm talking about the literature prior to them, which usually either focuses on the political allegiances or the religious and ethnic allegiances. Women weren't really examined, but then the literature turned to analyzing the role Republican women played in the Troubles, serving the Cumann man, as well as other things. And then some recent literature examined the role masculinity has played in the Troubles. Specifically, Fidelma Ashe did that a lot, exploring paramilitary groups as ways in which men can express their masculinity. And this more recent turn in literature, analyzing the Provisional IRA as a masculine and gendered entity, is where this paper is situated. And then I restate my thesis, and he said I shouldn't have restated my thesis. but I wanted to make sure you knew my thesis. And then I talk about nationalism and colonial liberation. So Irish nationalism was forged through subjugation under colonial British rule. Irish nationalism is predicated on independence from the British, which the Republic of Ireland achieved, but Northern Ireland did not. Provisional IRA was strongly nationalist and Republican. And these were all passive voice sentences, which they shouldn't have been. Edward Said states, to become aware of oneself as belonging to a subject people is the founding insight of anti-imperialist nationalism. Okay, the provisional IRA and the old IRA both take a militaristic view of how it's A united and not and whoa. Sorry guys, he like corrected my grammar in here sometimes, and apparently it's A united and not an united. That feels wrong. Anyway, when state building is situated against a colonial power, nationalism and militarism often coincide. This was the case in Northern Ireland for the provisional IRA. Ireland's state building occurred against the British imperial desire to retain sovereignty over Northern Ireland. Then I talk about masculinity. And so obviously ideas of masculinity vary based on culture and age. David Gilmore comes up with this idea of a ubiquitous male, which is a man that, so to be a man, one must impregnate woman, protect dependents from danger, and provision kith and kin. And then I talk about European ideas of normative masculinity, which include like willpower, honor, courage, discipline, competitiveness, quiet strength, stoicism. I really should have made this quote shorter, but there's a bunch of adjectives about how to be a man. And then so when examining the provisional IRA, it's clear that these definitions and descriptions of masculinity are applicable. Normative ideas of masculinity and the presence or lack of the phallus are all lenses through which to interrogate the feelings of the provisional IRA about their own masculinity. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I skipped a sentence. Other definitions of masculinity are more essentialist, focusing on the presence of the penis as a signifier of masculinity and the absence of the penis as a signifier of femininity. So the provisional IRA believed they embodied these masculine traits and believed they depicted masculinity. And now I'm talking about nationalism and masculinity. So to understand nationalist movements, one must understand how perceptions of masculinity influence nationalism. It's important to consider how masculinity influences liberation movements because masculinity and nationalism are intrinsically intertwined. Nationalism is often conceptualized as a movement by and for men to the exclusion of women. Some historians even argue that it's impossible to differentiate between terms such as honor, patriotism, cowardice, bravery, and duty because these terms are intrinsically masculine and nationalist. So because these terms are so interconnected, we need to understand liberation from a gendered viewpoint. Sorry, I know I said I wasn't going to read it, but all my sentences are so important. And now I'm talking about the Easter Rising and the War of Independence. So the history of men feeling called to defend Ireland from British imperialism and colonization goes back to the 1916 Easter Rising, which was the first shift in collective Irish consciousness towards nationalism and a disdain for British sovereignty. And then Padraic Pearse stated in his speech, The Coming Revolution, whatever comes to Ireland, she needs men, and we of this generation are not in any real sense men, for we suffer things which men do not suffer, and we seek to redress grievances by means which men do not employ. So that's Pearse's view on it. And then in the War of Independence, Irish women were attacked by British soldiers and raped by them, which, so there is this idea during the War of Independence of British men as aggressors and Ireland and Irish men as protectors and Irish women as victim. So yeah. And then narratives of masculinity include that men ought to defend their women, and if they're unable to do so, they're not truly men. And Irish men were viewed as the protectors of both Irish women and the nation of Ireland. And manly honor is used to comment on ethno-nationalist causes, which is clearly present in those drawn to the provisional IRA. It's also the case in other countries. For example, Melaugh, an Algerian poet and author, states, for a man to be conquered is to have his woman turned into fodder for imperialist postcards. Becoming a nationalist requires a man to resist the foreigner's use and abuse of his woman. So an effeminate man is a man that's weak and unmasculine and unable to defend his woman. The idea of an effeminate man being used to denigrate the masculinity of a colonized country is also present in Northern Ireland, and Irish men have been concerned with the feminization of themselves since the Rising. And then I get more into the Troubles and talking about the origins of the Troubles. So I start with what partition was. Do I need to explain partition? I'm just gonna assume people watching this know what partition is, and if you don't, comment and I'll tell you. But anyway, so I just talk about partition, obviously. Sectarian divide because of partition. You know, what Unionists and Republicans are. I always think, oh, people know this, and then people don't know it. Oh, whoa, I can zoom in. Sorry, guys. I learned that I can zoom in and out like that. That's good to know. Plantations of Ulster, which apparently I did not define well enough for my professor. Anyway, plantations of Ulster led to sectarian divide between native Irish people and British colonizers, and it continued up to the explosion of the Troubles in 1969. The call to arms in defense of the Irish nation was therefore very much a call to manhood. This coupling of the ideas of masculinity to physical force violence framed certain forms of masculinity as the medium through which the nation could be restored, and framed the national struggle as the medium through which Irish manhood could be restored. That was a direct quote. And my footnotes, they're there, but they're also not there, and I don't know why. So there's been a lot of challenges with researching the Troubles, including physical violence faced by lecturers. Maybe I'll make another video about that. And then, so, you know, talk about 2 lecturers that were murdered. Professor Marion Elliott organized Initiative 92, which promoted cross-cultural discussion. And some people say it laid the groundwork for the Good Friday Agreement, which ended the Troubles. The Good Friday Agreement was approved, obviously. Boston College archives contain testimony from members of the Provisional IRA, as well as the UDA and the UVF. It came under legal scrutiny in 2011. They contain tapes from the Belfast Project, a project designed to record oral histories of people who experienced the Troubles. These tapes were only supposed to be released after the interviewee's death. However, there was a subpoena issued for them. So that illustrates some of the issues that you face with studying the Troubles. And then the testimonies that were in the Boston College archives are used in the book Voices from the Grave, which is where I draw first-hand testimony from Brehon Hughes, which will be discussed later. He was an operating commander in the Provisional Irish Republican Army. He's dead. Yeah, he is dead. So members of the Provisional IRA viewed themselves as inheritors of the struggle of the Irish War of Independence, 1919 to 1921. And they viewed themselves as the defenders of the Catholic community in Northern Ireland. So Catholics were targeted by Protestants / the British, and were denied equal rights. Catholics attempted to peacefully protest housing and job discrimination with the March from Belfast to Derry in 1969, but they were attacked by Unionists. The British Army decided to wait out the unrest, which was unfavorable for the Catholics, and then the Provisional IRA was further strengthened when the British introduced internment, which interned Catholics indiscriminately. So then Catholics turned to a protector and turned toward the Provisional IRA. So Catholics in Northern Ireland didn't see a way for equality and peace without Northern Ireland joining the Republic of Ireland, and the Provisional IRA thought the only way for peace was violence. And then the Green Book, the Green Book states the Provisional IRA is the hero of the struggle of the IRA of the Irish War of Independence. And then I quote the Green Book where it says that. And then I talk about the Dáil of 1919 and the second Dáil, and then I talk about interrogation. That's kind of weird. I don't like that. So they talk about what to do when being interrogated. And notes that interrogators might engage in physical torture, psychological torture, and humiliation. Why did I say interesting? He said vague wording. How exactly does this wording reflect or support the goals of this paper? It is more than interesting. It was really awkward. Anyway, so I talked about humiliation. And the Green Book states that this humiliation will include stripping the prisoner of his clothes and remarks passed about his sexual organs. And then I quote the Green Book. And then the Green Book says he, the provisional, or the member of the IRA being interrogated, should look upon them, his interrogators, as homosexuals with the immunity of the establishment, as people become sadistic from homosexual tendencies which underlie them. And then the penis complex originates from Freudian theory. Freud theorizes that girls envy their father's penises, and the Green Book is applying this to the British Army as a way to feminize them. Oh man, my paper was choppy. Sorry guys. This is a much marker. And I make too vague of a connection, but that's the connection I made. This demonstrates the provisional IRA wanted to forewarn volunteers of threats to their masculinity that their interrogators may invoke. It states that to avoid being susceptible to this type of humiliation, volunteers ought to understand that their interrogators are latent homosexuals. Homosexual men are often viewed as effeminate in our society. Viewing their interrogators as homosexual and effeminate allows volunteers to see themselves as more masculine than their enemies. This emasculation felt by Irishmen with Republican sentiments in both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland has a long history. The feminization of Irishmen can be traced back to the 1700s when an essay titled "The North Briton" was published. So in that essay, they alienate and disempower Irish masculinity. So yeah, it demonstrates the historical precedents for attacks on Irish masculinity by the British. Heavy-handed language. And limits analysis. What does this tell you? This is another big concept getting short shrift in the discussion. So, sorry guys. When members of the provisional IRA, now I'm talking about prison. When members of the provisional IRA were in prison, they performed hegemonic masculinity. This masculinity was performed differently from other performances of masculinity in prison. It focused on enduring pain rather than inflicting it, and this endurance was how members of the provisional IRA demonstrated they were manly enough to stand up for the cause and not succumb to pressure from physical violence or sexual taunts. There were 3 phases of imprisonment: internment and political status, the no-wash and hunger strike period, and the post-hunger strike period. And then I talk about what each of those were. And then the no-wash and hunger strike periods were when the hegemonic masculinity in Northern Ireland was altered for Republican men. The hegemonic masculinity in this period was a skeletal hunger striker who endured British violence, and in the post-hunger strike period, it returned to what it was before the hunger strike period. And then I talk about Billy McKee. He was imprisoned in Crumlin Road in 1943 and became the prison's operating commander. He instituted daily drills, hierarchical leadership structure, and confiscated any pornographic or left-wing books, which caused the experience to be highly masculinized. And this set a precedence for how hegemonic masculinity would be adhered to in prisons in the future. Analyzing the hunger strike period demonstrates how narratives of hegemonic masculinity shifted in prison, but it was still adhered to. During this period, provisional IRA prisoners were humiliated by their wardens. These wardens were often Protestant, and Brennan Hughes states this regarding searches of provisional prisoners carried out by wardens. Systematically, cell by cell, a man was trailed out, spread-eagled across a mirror which lay on the floor to check the rectum, which was a totally ineffective way of finding the contraband that was there. It was degrading. The whole point of it was to degrade. So that's one example of humiliation. And then other examples of humiliation suffered by members of provisional IRA in prison include the insertion of a stick into the anus by prison guards, the insertion of pliers into the anus to retrieve an object that was believed to be in the rectum of the prisoner. Men who weren't deterred from the Republican cause by these searches and sexual assaults were lauded and seen as the masculine idea that other prisoners should follow. And then now we're at my conclusion. The provisional IRA viewed itself as the masculine protector of Irish women and the nation of Ireland, and I showed this. And then further research could build on this paper's conceptualizations of masculinity and the provisional IRA and apply it to other paramilitary or liberation organizations such as the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Euskadi Askatasuna, more commonly known as the ETA, which are organizations that are often compared to the provisional IRA due to similarities in their history and emergence. Like the Irish tricolour and the Palestinian flag are often flown together in Northern Ireland. And this established solidarity means that future research on gender and the relations between the provisional IRA and the PLO could be impactful for Palestinians and Irish people. And then I say that this filled the gap in the literature related to examining the provisional IRA as an inherently gendered entity. Masculinity and men as defenders or protectors of Irish women and Ireland have been a common theme across Irish history. It's worthwhile to examine because it has been accepted but gone unanalyzed. Through analysis of masculinity, new understandings of paramilitary and liberation organizations can be uncovered. And then I have my bibliography, which I feel like I should post on screen. This paper, it's forward a highly original and ambitious argument. This is the stuff that my professor said. Clear thesis, highly complex issues, but I give too many big complex ideas short shrift. He says that a lot. And they are not convincing. Needed a more serious discussion of those topics, more expanded, and it's too choppy, and it needs more transition sentences. And I could have used secondary sources better. He said, as a lay reader, I had trouble getting a sense of the major events. Sorry, dude. And I could have talked more about historiography and theory. I could have situated myself within a broader scholarly discussion either about the Troubles, IRA methods, or anti-colonial struggles and masculinity, and I got a B on the paper. So, sorry if you thought this was going to be like a super good paper and then you get to the end and you're like, oh, she got a B. But that is my paper.